So here's where we'll start, right? I want to start with the smallest bite that I have, and which is this whole controversy about India's GDP per capita almost looking like it's crashing as against Bangladesh's, and we are sort of level terms with Bangladesh at this point. And I remember we were talking about the economic situation when we were hanging out in private, and you'd said that it's a cause of concern. Is this the red flag that you were mentioning that we'd see sometime soon, or is this just some out of proportion news story that's not doing justice to the substance?
Look, it's a symptom. It's still not the red flag yet, but it's an indicator of where things are heading. Because see, you've got so many mandates now, you've got two absolute majorities. And the constant refrain we hear about not going in for economic reforms, as in, hard, painful reforms. Because if it isn't painful, it's not a reform. Okay. At the same time, jhatka pain, like what you saw with demonetization, isn't actually a reform. That's just jhatka. Okay? Because the goat dies at the end of jhatka or halal, whatever you want to call it. The goat is dead. There is no growth to be had from it. This isn't like building up your muscles, which takes pain.
Right.
Bakra mar jata hai. So this is the issue that we're looking at. Now, Bangladesh, if you look at it, some of us have been saying this for almost 7, 8, 9 years, that ever since Sheikh Hasina took over and brought in all her reforms and all of that, especially her industrial reforms, Bangladesh was going to go way ahead of us. You read Mihir Sharma's book, Restart, Last Chance for the Indian Economy. He's actually got a chapter dedicated to Bangladesh and why Bangladesh was about to overtake India. Okay. So we've known this for a very long time. We've postponed our economic reforms for so long. Since 1991, we have not had proper economic reforms in this country. We've had tinkering under Vajpayee, fairly decent tinkering under Vajpayee, a bit more haphazard tinkering under Modi. My issue with Modi's policies are that they're all jhatka policies. Whereas good policy is like a perfume. When when they say you test a perfume, they say you always spray it at your under your ears, and you go for a walk for half an hour, either on your wrists or your ears, and you go for a walk for half an hour, and you have to walk. Why? Because what happens is there is the first scent that hits you, and then a perfume is essentially a toxin, much like economic reforms. It is a toxin to the system.
Right.
It produces a reaction, and that reaction takes about 10-15 minutes to develop. And then you have the mature fragrance of the perfume that comes after about 30 minutes or so. Reforms are like that, right? It's a toxin to the system in the sense in that it forces a reaction. Okay. And what happens is it is the second order and third order effects of policy that are the most important. The first order is the jhatka that you get to see, which is queues at banks during demonetization and things like that. That is not a reform per se. What happens after that? That is the reform. Okay. So you see this also with GST. For example, and with demonetization, we didn't know what was going to happen. With GST, at least, all of us were predicting that if you've got 4 slabs, knowing the kind of bureaucracy, lower level bureaucracy, the extortionate, rapine bureaucracy you have in this country, they are going to use it to extort businesses. And smaller businesses aren't going to have the accounting manpower to sit and work all of this out. So the extortion is going to get worse. So you look at my friend Yusuf Unjawala, who runs the Defense Forum of India. He also runs a house supplies store. And every single time, every month, some new guy comes, demands a new rate on something, a plastic wash basin tap. Just because it's gold plated, he decides it's a luxury plastic, not even metal. A plastic tap, because it comes with that cheap gold plating that wears off in about
6 months.
a month or so maximum. 6 months
would
be a luxury product. But that wears off in 1 month. He now wants to charge it at luxury product rates. And for the arbitration, Yusuf has to go all the way to Mangalore, wasting 2 whole days, 6 hours drive, whatever, up for the hearing, then do the hearing and then come back. And all kinds of rubbish like this. And there isn't even a system where you can catalog this thing and sort these things out. Now they're planning on reducing it to a 2 slab, but even in the 2 slab, you're going to have these problems. See, this kind of, we love being verbose. And verbosity adds to complexity. Verbosity reduces comprehension in the general population. So, there was this tax on restaurants. I think this was in the UPA time. It said 7% on something or 12% on something. Now, it means the same thing, 7% on something. Why do you have to word it in 2-3 different ways when the amount you're charging is the same? So people didn't understand what it was, and some restaurants were charging 12%, some restaurants were charging 7%, and then they had to come up with a corrective thing. So, this is the kind of rubbish that you have. This bureaucrat-driven policies where they masturbate off to how much complex words they can put into one law.
Right, yeah, right.
And it just goes all downhill from there.
Is it like an... Sorry, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Just curious. Is it to say that there is this masturbatory verbosity, this unneeded complexity that gets added for the sake of just feeling competent rather than being competent? Is that like an observation we have from the outside, or is it truly that incompetence is being masked by verbose complexity? Like, is that really the case that ये लोग बैठे हुए हैं वहां पे genuinely कि यार इसको और complicate करते हैं?
It's both. So it's incompetence on the one hand of the political executive, that is the elected politicians, to not see that verbosity is either being used to undermine policy or to mask the bureaucrat's incompetence. Okay. So if the bureaucrat is doing it, this is what bureaucrats do. But if you are not seeing it and you think the bureaucrat is Raja, and you are allowing him to bog you down in micro detail. So, there's that very famous episode of Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, I forget which, where the Prime Minister is given 3 boxes full of work. And the operative section is in the 3rd box right at the bottom, which you'd only reach at 1 or 2 in the morning, so you wouldn't pay attention to it. This is what they do.
Right.
Okay. If you haven't been able to see through that, and if you're going along with this useless verbosity, shame on you. After 6 years, if you haven't wisened up to the game, shame on you.
Right.
You can no longer blame the babus. It is your problem.
Right. And so what are these magical industrial reforms or economic reforms that Sheikh Hasina has done in Bangladesh that's like speeding her economy like that?
Yes, scaling up. Labor laws. Labor laws was something that this government wanted to introduce in its first term within the first 6 months. And then Rahul Gandhi came up with the Soot Boot Ki Sarkar, and the Sarkar got completely scared and then backtracked on all those reforms. Do you remember those labor reforms that meant happen?
I remember Soot Boot Ki Sarkar and whatnot being that thing. Yep.
And what happened here is, this is what Sheikh Hasina did. Here, you actually pay a penalty. If you're going to go from micro to small, small to medium to large, you pay a penalty because the regulatory controls on you, the labor controls on you increase exponentially. Okay. And fine, nobody cares about that. If it weren't such thick, fat regulations, verbose regulations, number 1. Number 2, so ambiguously written that you can't make head or tail out of it. Number 3, highly erratic judiciary, which, the law is the law because of consistency in application. The law without consistency is tyranny. And that is what you have out here. Okay. You don't know when a judge will say, oh, the law may say this, but the bigger law is the dharma of protecting our labor. Therefore, I'm ruling against you. This is a joke. This isn't a judicial system. Okay. You have things like this. At the 4th level, you have the fact that you don't have hire and fire laws. Because, quality control is a function of labor laws. Unless you have hire and fire, you cannot have good quality control. There has to be that accountability. And you can have hire and fire in spite of labor unions. The problem is we have given labor unions too much power. They don't even serve labor. And labor is only that 2% organized labor that you're protecting with these laws. The remaining 98% of labor in India is unorganized, who have absolutely no protection.
Right.
So, and this is the fifth level, that you are preventing 98% of the population from coming into the organized labor market, because organized labor is your, what is the BJP's trade union called?
I have no idea.
I know they all have their own trade unions, C2 and Akhil Bharatiya, no, that's
the student union.
They've got a trade union, Mazdoor Sangh, Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, I think that's it. All of these things are basically political cartels, where the bosses make money extorting business houses to mere ko paisa do, mere bachchi ka paisa do, and crap like that. And this is how things go about. So, because they have to cartelize in order to, the Communist Party, for example, will control a trade union, which will then, essentially extort the bosses of the business, pretend to extort. And the deal will be that the trade union boss's daughter will get to go to America, while the industrialist can shove all kinds of shit down the throats of the normal laborers. Okay, so it's a completely corrupt, nasty system. And this fellow, this trade union boss, will then go tell the local minister, Pinarayi Ravi, or what's his name, I forget now, whatever, something, the chief minister of blah, blah land, that, I can deliver these 10,000 workers, they will vote for you. Therefore, you give me political things, make me an MLA the next time round, la-di-da-di-da. It's a completely rotten system through and through to the core. And, this is what worries me about Modi's incrementalism and about Modi's so-called big ticket reforms, which is that he does not understand deep systemic problems. He doesn't understand that it's a system of systems. You can't change one thing. It's like going to a house that's leaking, or going to a patient who has jaundice and saying, भाई तेरा मुंह बहुत पीला है, ये मैं तेरे को Chanel का फाउंडेशन नंबर 5 देता हूँ, वो फाउंडेशन लगा ले, तेरा मुंह थोड़ा गोरा हो जाएगा. मेकअप से पीलिया जाता नहीं है. ठीक है ना? मेकअप से you can only hide the पीलिया, you can't get rid of it.
Right.
And that is what we're doing. So, I'm quite disappointed. And I don't want to be too negative here. They are doing things. The problem is, it's just not good enough.
Right.
You have to do a lot more. Right. You don't understand how things, and for my own example, 4 or 5 years back, I used to be a really not very good defense analyst, because it's a growth process, of course. I mean, you grow throughout your life. Because I used to think that defense was a silo.
You told me about that, yes.
At that point, yeah. So Samir forced me to, look at education, nutrition, economics, and la-di-da to understand how everything is tied up together. You can't solve your defense problems unless you solve all the other problems as well. Not happening. So, I'm despondent now. This isn't a red flag. It's a symptom. It's going to get worse.
So tell me, very often when I have a discussion to this effect, or when I think about it myself, it almost feels like, because of the economic deficiency of our recent past, that we are not, this is my hypothesis, shoot me down when I'm wrong, that we are not culturally sophisticated enough to play by the rules. And therefore, no matter what system we put in place, we find our own ways to, sort of corrupt it and whatnot. But in this example, and what we've spoken about up until, my concern is that Bangladesh is not very different. If it's not as good, it's probably worse, right? How is it that they have then, and it's not even like you can resort to the whole population argument in that case. They are as bad population wise as we are. How is it that they are managing to play by the rules, or have a systemic change? Is it a cultural problem, or is it a systemic problem? Are they different? You know what I'm getting at?
Right. So see, Bangladesh corruption is probably more blatant than in India. They're probably much more corrupt than we are. But remember, both Britain and America, before they became fully industrialized, were just as corrupt.
Right.
France was just as corrupt. That's why you had the French Revolution.
Right. Yes.
So the thing is, it's kind of, about the Kuznets curve, right? That after you reach a certain per capita income, the environment becomes more important to you. because then the quality of life improves. You're more focused on the quality of life, and therefore your environmental consciousness becomes higher. This is like that. The richer and richer you get, the more you focused on correcting systems you become. Which is what happened in America. America was run entirely by a small bunch, and in Britain it was run by the nobles, the House of Lords, realistically, right? Which was a little cartel.
Right.
And it's quite curious because the House of Lords has how many members? 300, 400, 500, 600 members. Pata nahi kya hai. I think it's the House of Commons that has 600 members. In the Mughal Empire, you had 655 families that controlled 70% of the wealth of the empire. So that isn't the issue out here. The issue is, do you understand what you are doing? Because with Sheikh Hasina, she understood what was needed for industrial growth. She knew that they can't do things like space, they can't do things like nuclear weapons, they can't do indigenous fighter aircraft and all of that. And she decided we are going to focus on two things, ceramics and textiles, where they already had a certain strength. And they allowed those sectors to grow. They didn't even impose restrictions on them like, they've got sweatshops there. In India, you don't really have sweatshops in that sense. But then you don't have, people can't open up new factories.
Right.
There, they can just keep expanding. And ultimately, the quality of life will grow. Here, you're not allowing to expand. You're not even allowing you're settling. So say Bangladesh started from here, the average Bangladeshi textile worker. Today, they're still not up to you. They're still slightly lower. But in say 10, 15 years, they'll be here. You have been here, you continue to be here, and you don't want to go anything beyond here. That is our problem. So you understand what's happening out here. It's this Chalta Hai attitude.
It's gotten back. It's come back.
It's come back. It's come back, and it came back because of all those 2G scams and things like that. For a short period in between, I think end of Vajpayee and UPA 1, from Vajpayee's beginning to UPA 1, wealth and profit for the first time in India became good terms. It was good to be an industrialist. It was good to make profit. It was good to, be rich.
Right.
By UPA 2, not just because of the scams, but also because of that NAC crap and the boys' unrestricted socialism, wealth became a dirty word again. Right? So you're no longer aspirational anymore.
Right.
And that's very, very, very problematic. Because unless you're aspirational, you can't grow. I mean, just because some pseudo-religious quack told you 70 years back that this country can survive by spinning a spinning wheel, producing low-quality garbage cloth, countries can't exist on that. Maybe lemurs can, maybe chimpanzees, orangutans, and baboons can. Human beings can't. That's not the way things work.
That brings me to I was saving Tanishq for the last because I think that would make for the bigger topic. But this is exactly where I get curious. To me, it often feels like I've woken up in an India where everything that I was taught about India is no longer true. Right? Like Gandhi was a goddamn hero. I didn't realize when he became this figure worth questioning and, his economic policies or shit. Like on 2nd October this year, Twitter was filled with people having critical shots at Gandhi. And I'm not saying they were necessarily distasteful. I'm sure some were. But these Nehru and Gandhi were the heroes, right? And it's to me, it seems like not just the heroes, but the narratives that I was told about India are probably have very little to no space in the modern, in this India that I'm living in. So I would never question Hindu-Muslim unity. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems to the effect of that, but to the effect of what I was seeing in the Tanishq ad, it's like a common fantasy fetish. It's like a common social, like dream aspiration that is peddled to me. That was peddled to me in school. That is something I believed in. That's something I'd seen in Bollywood. That's something it's not out of my imagination. It's not beyond the scope of what I can imagine. It's pretty much in fact, it's on I'm sure there were enough people like me who went to similar schools, who had similar socioeconomic backgrounds, who were like, wow, what a beautiful ad. Why the hell did it blow up then? What is happening?
So, there was this Napoleon's foreign minister, Talleyrand. He had this very famous phrase. It's worse than a crime. It's a blunder.
Huh.
And politicians can't afford blunders. They can afford crimes. They can't afford blunders. Tanishq's huge blunder, and I wonder how their PR didn't pick this up, was that ad came out the same week that 2 Hindu boys had been killed by the relatives of their Muslim girlfriends or the girls they were courting or whatever. So, this is like going out and saying, this is like, coming up with a funny anti-Semitic ad in 1936, which you think is really funny, like say Borat, assume Borat,
right.
the running of the Jews. Now, assume he put it out the same week that, say, 1,000 Jews had been massacred in a synagogue fire set off by neo-Nazis.
Right.
Would Borat postpone the movie, or would he allow it to go ahead?
For sure. Right. He'd postpone
it was a horrific blunder. I think somebody in that PR department has to be fired. It would have gone under the radar had, first of all, it was politically clueless about the mood of the social media mood of the country. And it tells you a lot that if your advertiser is clueless about the social media mood of the country, he or she shouldn't even be in the advertising field, number one. Second is the PR executives of the firm that made it were so dumb. They didn't even monitor the PR trends to see what had happened that week and for it to blow up. So whoever is in charge of the marketing at Tata's really needs a kick up their ass. Because this kind of online lynch mob, I'm not going to blame the online lynch mob because the left also does it, the right also does it. Do I like it? No. But do they have a right to vent? Do they have a right to call for a boycott? Absolutely. They don't have a right to say, go kill the advertiser or go kill Ratan Tata or whatever, or let's go burn down, Tanishq buildings or whatever.
Right.
But they absolutely have a right to abuse. They have a right to boycott. They have a right to go after you online. Absolutely. Sacrosanct right to go after you online.
That is super interesting. How you mentioned the social media mood. And that's sort of what I was thinking about. I was like, okay, yaar, like I can imagine people having problem with the ad. Tell me one version of Hindu-Muslim peace that works. If I can at least imagine, because this was my, let's just say, my average imagination of Hindu-Muslim peace up until this ad became a thing where people were like, okay, we are not okay with it. So if you can tell me, like, in this new concept of India that we are coming up with as we go, as we are building, what is an imaginable scenario when Hindus and Muslims exist in peace? What has to happen? How does it look like?
I think at some level, this every time you fantasize something,
right,
or overstate something, it's usually a falsehood. And I think that applies to Hindu-Muslim peace as well. Hindus and Muslims haven't coexisted in India. They have at best led parallel lives in India. They have led segregated parallel lives because you look, they usually live in their own mohallas. Okay, where do you see syncretic side-by-side existence except in 2 separate mohallas? At most, one street will be living because one side of the street, the left side will be Muslim, the right side may be Hindu, and that will be about it. Okay, this is a fantasy. It's like how, in the Vedas, everything begins with Om Shanti and ends with Om Shanti. Everything is Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Why? Because those were violent times. And the Vedas was written, see, the Veda was the Hindu Treaty of Westphalia.
Right.
It was the coming together of lots of different streams of thought that had fought at the Battle of 10 Kings, Sudas and the Battle of 10 Kings. And they decided, we don't want to have these wars of religion anymore. Europe came to that conclusion in the 1600s. We came to that conclusion in, I don't know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 15,000 BC. I don't know what it is.
Right.
I'm not going to get into that year controversy, but whenever.
Right.
And we said, this is now, the Vedas is now everybody's point of view Chalta Hai. So in the 10th book, you have, the Nasadiya Shukta, which is an atheist Shukta, right? And you still have the prayers to the gods and all of that and la-di-da, where you have to perform the prayers properly and so on and so forth. So all of that Chalta Hai. But in this case, what you have is, the Jewish greeting is shalom, peace. Why? Because when you were desert dwellers, every drop of water mattered. You come and drink from my well, I will kill you. You see this in it's a movie, so it's this thing, Lawrence of Arabia, the famous one with Peter O'Toole. The Arab and Peter O'Toole go and drink at a Bedouin's well. And the Bedou shoots the other Arab guy, and he forgives Peter because Peter's an Englishman. He didn't know, but the other Bedou should have known not to drink water from my well. That is why they keep saying salam, salam, salam alaikum, alaikum assalam. It's showing, it's like when you make contact with a warrior tribe, with headhunters, you have to put on these shows of peacefulness and things like that. Okay. Why do you keep saying peace? Why do you keep saying shanti, shanti, shanti? Shanti nahi tha kya? तो पूछ रहे किस लिए हो? अगर शांति था, then why are you going on saying shanti, shanti?
Right.
Then you'd be saying paisa, 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 or rupiya, rupiya, rupiya. Na?
Something like that, right? So
Hindu-Muslim unity is that fantasy. It probably never existed, which is why you concoct this hogwash like Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, or Hindu-Muslim unity, or whatever. It has always been a deeply, deeply violent, fraught relationship. Just like this nonsense that Hinduism is a religion of peace. It is not. It is an extremely violent religion. You look at Thirugyana Sambandar, who is one of the Alvars, one of the 72 Alvars. He had 8,000 Jain monks impaled. As in, can you imagine a Hindu holy man asking for sharpened bamboo sticks to be inserted up the anuses of 8,000 Jain monks and for them to be suspended on that, like Vlad the Impaler, who became Dracula.
Right.
Okay. This is also Hinduism. Okay. So this nonsense about Hinduism being a peaceful religion and all of that, every time you tend to exaggerate things, I start getting very suspicious, and I usually treat it as hogwash.
So, but like, okay, I'm willing to buy that, because Tavleen said something very similar. She mentioned, she said the Hindu-Muslim fraud sentiment has always existed in India. And I was like, really? I was shocked at the same thing, because I bloody grew up being told that there are 4 boys, one of them wears a turban, one of them wears a skull cap, the other wears a cross, and then the 4th person wears something that resembles like an Om or something, and they all hold hands in unity and diversity. That's like the drawing they make you do in 1st grade.
So this is Amar Akbar Anthony.
That is Amar Akbar Anthony.
It's crap. It doesn't actually exist. Right? Anybody who watches Amar Akbar Anthony would be clueless about the fact that it was the Arya Samaj, Dayanand Saraswati, who went and alienated the Sikhs, telling them, we need to go back to the Vedas, your gurus are all frauds and la-di-da-di-da, which completely alienated the Sikhs from the Hindus and created all the schisms. Okay, so you won't learn that. I mean, how many people actually know how the Arya Samaj created that rift between Sikhs and Hindus?
I had no idea.
Yeah, if Sikhs today are a separate religion, it's entirely because of the Arya Samaj and the mischief they played.
And why did they try to do that?
Everybody has this very benign notion of the Arya Samaj, that they're so sweet, they do intercaste marriage and la-di-da-di-da. When I was growing up, I didn't even know what the hell caste was. It was irrelevant in the house. Nobody asked about caste. So the first time I came to Delhi, after 7, 8, 9 years, I was sitting in the school bus, and this guy asked me, "Tera caste kya hai?" Like, what the hell? How rude! How dare you even ask me my caste? And it turned out he meant your surname.
Right.
But anyway, that's a slightly different thing. But going by our civics book, which talked about the evils of caste, living in New Delhi or living in Madras or Kolkata, you didn't even know what the hell caste was. Okay. And then you go explore everything outside, and then you begin to realize how big an equation caste actually is. But for the first 10 years of my life, my parents were in intercaste marriage. My parents divorced, and then my stepfather was Dalit. So for us, even mentally caste was never an issue. Right. But that doesn't mean just because mentally caste isn't an issue for me, doesn't mean caste isn't an issue for 98% of the rest of the population. So, it's complicated stuff like that. The moment we try to and that is the thing, when you try to oversimplify something, Hindu-Muslim unity, it's so crude, it's almost laughable in that sense.
I get the sentiment. I'm still concerned though, because say what you will, even in Israel at this point, there is, let's say, a small or a minority of Arabs that get along with Jews, and there is like an arm's length distance peace equilibrium that the society sort of kind of has, right? And with all the disclaimers that I've used here, like even to that extent, only to understand the position that you, or for that matter, if there is a group of people that think similarly, what they represent. I'm just curious, what does it look like where I no longer have to worry about Muslims and Hindus and all of this all the time being on the news? What does that peaceful state look like? Is there a future vision, any of that at all? Like,
it looks like Narnia or Hogwarts, because it's probably unachievable. It'll exist in a fantasy. Look, even in America, let's look at things. Let's look at different systems of integration.
Sure.
Okay. Let's look at, say, a country like Australia, whose national myth is a fair chance for everybody. Because of their convict heritage, they believe everybody should have a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, whatever. It's a fair chance. It's not ethnically based. It is linguistically based, that everybody speaks English. Okay? One. Then you have an ethnically based country like Japan. Then you have a linguistically based country like Germany and France. And you have an ideologically based country like America, which is the American dream, which is an economic ideal. Australia is a social ideal. Okay. In Australia, even today, the Vietnamese remain Vietnamese. You have intermarriage. You have Jewish white intermarriage. You have Vietnamese white intermarriage. You have Indian white intermarriage, but that is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction. They remain distinct societies. Japan, ethnically based, so there's no question of another nationality out there. The Koreans, because a lot of Korean comfort women came there, and there was a lot of that Korean influx in the 30s and 40s, 20s, 30s, 40s. They have to hide their Koreanness, right? They have to take on Japanese names and things like that. Germany, you have to linguistically conform. The Vietnamese still remain a distinct community, even though the Vietnamese have integrated, like in Australia, like in America, they have integrated completely into German society. They are a model community. Several ministers from the Vietnamese community. Why have the Turks not integrated? Okay, France. Why hasn't the North African community integrated? French Jews are today completely integrated. Okay, but why aren't North Africans completely integrated? Why
North Africa is Algeria and stuff.
Algeria,
right?
But even Black French people from, say, Cote d'Ivoire or Niger or something like that, are not integrated completely into French society. So this comes. There was a very interesting study done. America today. Just because some people like, say, Thomas Sowell and well-to-do Black people are integrated into society, what does Black Lives Matter? It shows you the lack of integration into society,
for sure,
which is quite significant. So there's a lot of things happening out there. This notion that you integrate automatically, you have to find the common enemy. This is why we keep going back to Huntington and substance and salience. When did Jews started being seen as white people? When there was somebody more alien than the Jews coming in, right? So in all of Europe, all the pogroms were directed at Jews, till you started seeing more Black people, more brown people, more colonies who were like, oh my God, they may be Jews, but at least they're white, so we can intermarry and Disraeli can become the Prime Minister of Britain. Why? Because Disraeli could only become the Prime Minister of Britain after you started having blacks and browns and yellows come into Britain, right? Italians were considered low-class people in America. Italians weren't allowed in. Initially, the Irish weren't allowed in. Catholics weren't allowed in. Then Catholics were okay, but Italians weren't because you're darker. You're not really white. You're kind of
yellowish.
Cream.
Cream, right.
And then after the other migration started, Italy became okay. Italians are also now white. So this is how things happen. So this understanding the difference between substance and salience in India, you've never had that. You've never had that.
You
So
said substance and silence.
substance is what connects us.
Right.
So why do both Prakhar and Abhijit consider themselves to be Indians? And why do we not consider Imran Khan to be an Indian? That is salience. Substance is what ties us together. Salience is what separates us.
Salience. Right. So I understand, right? Like you can make the case that there is, like, the blacks are not integrated in America. There might be but then how do I imagine a demographic equilibrium? Like, what does a peaceful situation look like? Or is there no peaceful situation ever? Is the final answer that Muslims must leave for Pakistan? Like, what do we think?
So
or we're waiting for Sri Lankans to come in so that we can then be like...
Scary answer, which is that it was probably possible before the information age, where your knowledge was restricted. So for one of the things that I've seen where essentially Asiatic, despotic, feudal, medieval population, Central Asia, so Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan, which are horrible, horrible, nasty places to be in. Because it was massive resource shortages, extraordinary cruelty of a steppe people and things like that, despite the few cities here and there. Who, over 70 years of the Soviet Union, started thinking of themselves as European, following sedentary European norms, eating pork, drinking alcohol, and so on and so forth, being quite irreligious, or all to the point of being anti-religious almost. Because even now in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, if you're seen going to mosque every day, the secret police will knock at your door and take you away.
Why?
They're not comfortable with religion.
Oh, so they're so anti-religious at this point.
They're not anti-religious. They're fine with they use religion as a binder. In addition to ethnic binding, because they are Uzbek, Turkoman, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik. But they also are very scared of it being anything other than an identity marker. You're free to have religion. You are not free to believe too much in that religion.
That's so interesting.
It is. Which is why I find Central Asia, I think of all the places I've been to, North Korea and Central Asia, of course, Central Asia has amazing architecture. But other than the architecture, I find the social dynamic to be just fascinating, because there are for me, initially, I used to think of it when I lived in the USSR as a kid. I used to think it was fascinating because this is such a progressive society. It's the socialist. I was a full-on communist when I was a kid. As in, I hated America. I wanted to if you had met me when I was 7 years old, I would be the kind that would have probably flown the plane into the World Trade Center. I hated America.
Look like the kind.
Because they were opposing my beloved USSR and the progressive future ideals of socialism and communism. Not socialism. I thought socialists were traitors. I was a full-on communist. Remember that. But today, when I talk to my Muslim friends from, say, Iran or Afghanistan, because I travel there, I have family in Iran, so I go there quite often. They look at Turan, which is Central Asia. It used to be Iran, Turan. Iran is Persianate, Turan is Turkic. Turan is a cultural genocide. They believe that the whole culture of that region, very complex culture, Turkic meets Persianate meets something else, has been completely wiped out, which is also true. So it has also been a sort of ethnic
leveler.
Not leveler, cleansing in a sense. It has been a cultural cleansing. So, it's so complex, but it could only be achieved in a pre-information age where your control of information was absolute. Your control of society was absolute. In this day and age with democracies, best of luck, I don't think it's going to happen.
Right. That's a very interesting point. That the
scaling... Sorry, just to
please
really articulate it. It was a very curious intersection of industrialization meets pre-information industrialization meets very good or very chalu or very cunning social policy in the case of the USSR and the Turks. With the others, you see China doing it. China has, you can't do it in the information age with the Uyghurs. China's probably trying it, but they're sociologically not very good, because if you look at Chinese sociologists, they're complete rubbish. And Chinese information control is also not the best. So,
right.
Ship sailed.
Right. No, but it's so interesting that the fact that as soon as the information industry scaled, democracy sort of reached this very weird stalemate situation where they cannot have short-term costs of big nature to justify any long-term benefits that they might think is all right in any sense, right? Like it's always in the world's view. It's always subject to international opinion. It always has to be looked at like that. And I mean, we see that, when Amit Shah said, what Western human rights cannot be applied to the Indian context. And there is stuff like that keeps popping up. China has this whole rhetoric about how the Western values are decadent and so on. But I am still caught up with this Central Asia thing. So these guys are like what is their central narrative then if it's not religion? Like what do they bind around? Like with the cultural parts, what is happening there?
So Central Asia is very, very curious. In Turkmenistan, what happens is it's very much a imagined ethnic binding, because if you look at the flag of Turkmenistan, it's a green this thing with a strip with 5 tamgas, and those are the tamgas which are the tribal markers of the 5 main tribes of Turkmenistan. Okay, so it's a tribal Turkoman identity, which was and still is to an extent wrapped up in a cult of personality around their president.
Achha.
In Uzbekistan, it's very much a cultural identity, because remember, the Uzbeks, unlike the Turkomans, became sedentary. And there's a very funny story about this, because in Bengali, as I suspect in North India as well, one of the swear words, one of the words for idiot, used to be Ujbuk or Uzbek. Why? Because it was the Uzbeks that had settled down and created Tashkent and Samarkand and Bukhara. Well, Tashkent didn't exist in those days, Samarkand and Bukhara. And the Turkomans, if you go to Turkmenistan, you'll see it's a full-on desert. There's no green patches out there. It's just complete desert. Because they were desert dwellers, much greater resource competition, they were the ones that would come and occupy, control, and invade everybody else. And so the invasions of India the troops were mostly Turkoman. And their hatred for the Uzbeks, who were their traditional neighbors, made Uzbek the swear word. So when Borat keeps cursing the Uzbeks, he says, we are going to open fire on the Uzbeks with our catapults and things like that. It's actually a very deep social phenomenon, because all the neighboring tribes, the Tajiks, the Kyrgyz, the Kazakhs, and the Turkomans, hated the Uzbeks, because none of them had sedentary societies like the Uzbeks did.
They chilled out. Uzbeks, they just chilled
out. Uzbeks chilled out. So Uzbekistan actually has a cultural identity. It's also different linguistic families. So Uzbek is a Kipchak language, Kipchak Turkic. Turkoman is Oghuz, Western Turkic. So it's same as Azerbaijan and Turkey. Uyghur, for example, is Karlukit or Eastern Turkic. Kazakh is a different branch. I think Kazakh is also Kipchak, one of the Kipchak branches. But these are linguistic, ethnic identities, and they tend to overlap amongst each other. But it is a coherent national identity.
That's very solid. That's like, I only got acquainted with, I have been fascinated by the Middle East for such a long time. I only got acquainted with Iran recently in a book that I was reading. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called The Ayatollah Begs to Differ. It's some American guy who's Iranian who goes to Iran and then writes about it. So it's like a filtered view of what Iran might be from a very Western but Iranian lens. And I enjoyed reading it thoroughly, because it's he paints a vivid picture of what Iran looks like. And now I'm just interested. Now I just want to see what Tehran looks like and like how it is.
Have to. It's amazing.
Right? But Central Asia is somewhere I've never, I think that's going to be next. All the documentaries I'm going to watch the next few days are going to be around Central Asia.
Iran, again, is so different. Because, Khamenei isn't ethnically Iranian. He's ethnically Turkic. He's Azerbaijani.
Okay.
So, Iran is another fascinating piece because when you look at it technically,
Huh.
even though the empires, Turkic empires, the Mughal Empire, the Ottoman Empire, they were all called the Persianate empires because, they got completely absorbed in Persian culture. It was sometime only in the 1500s where the Ottoman Empire decided that they're going to use Turkic as the official language and not Persian anymore.
Huh.
And everybody was shocked in the Mughal court. They were like, oh my God, you've regressed back into barbarism. How can you give up Persian for Turkic? Even though the Mughal native language was also Turkic.
Huh.
They're Kipchaks from, the Fargana Valley.
Right.
So Persia for me has always been that very, very tantalizing sociological study. And if you go there, you go to Tehran, you'll see this completely sociologically clueless, drug and alcohol fueled, rich, socially disconnected city.
Like South Delhi.
Beautiful city, like South Delhi,
Yeah.
but much richer and much more tasteful. South Delhi,
sure.
99% of the people have no class.
Yes.
They,
It's only Mercedes C class and Mercedes E class.
God,
Right.
exactly, right. But in Tehran, they actually have good taste. Most people have good taste. But then you go to Shiraz, which is much more rural in its outlook. And you'll see, because that is Fars, that is where Persepolis was. So that is the beating heart of Iranian culture. It's completely different. It's much more conservative. You go to Isfahan, which was the Safavid capital. It's much more urbane, but it's also ethnically very different. You go to the east, Mashhad is completely ethnically different. Tabriz is Turkic, it's Azerbaijani technically, so it's completely different again. You have the Kurdish western areas, which I haven't been to yet, of Iran. So you have these ethnic things. And that's when, for me, the Iranian revolution, called Islamic revolution makes sense.
Right.
Because they never called it the Shia revolution. They called it the Islamic revolution. Why? Because they have huge pockets of Sunnism even within the Kurds are Sunni. The Khuzastanis are Sunni. So there's the Arab areas near Iraq, which are Sunni. There is Balochistan, Waziristan, which is a part of Pakistani Balochistan technically, ethnically, which is also Sunni.
Right.
So, it had to be masqueraded around as an Islamic and not a Shia revolution. And there's we can just go on talking about Iran because there's so many cultural facets to Iran, which never comes out, One of my big complaints about Western scholarship on Iran is it is so crude. It is so black and white. It's just Iran versus us. There's no understanding of, the deep regional, the linguistic divisions within Iran. You can even explore Iran through its food. Gilaki cuisine, for example, is very different from, say, Tabrizi cuisine, which is very different from Tehran, which is very different from the South. The South is, you'll actually use a lot of tamarind and fish, which is a very Tamil, Kerala thing to do. It's actually more than Kerala, it's a Tamil, Andhra thing to do. East coast even, not even on the west coast in that sense. So, even that cuisine exploration leads you to so much because technically, if you look at it, there is a cuisine belt where India is the spiciest and it goes towards Iraq and Saudi Arabia, which are spicy, but not that spicy. Iran is the odd man out because it's totally non-spicy. Between Pakistan and Iraq has a lot of spices in their food. Pakistan has a heck of a lot of spices in its food, but Afghanistan and Iran don't. Why? Because it is a complete Turkic. It's a north to south Turkic cuisine influence that came down south.
Very interesting.
So, so the cuisine doesn't match the ethnicity, which doesn't match the language because Persianate went up into Turan.
Right.
So cuisine came down, culture and language went up. Religion came from the south, got modified by the north because remember the Iran till the 1500s was a Sunni state. It was 99% Sunni. It was only when the Safavids, who were a Turkic, Kizilbash, Turkic Shia tribe, they forcibly converted Iran to Shiism. So, it's just fascinating, those layers of history and the ethnicity and all of that. they're just completely lost.
Yeah, yes, I get that. I'm almost tempted to touch upon like even it's Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? That are
Yeah,
not getting along.
yeah, yeah.
But before that, let me start you off with China and Taiwan and India. What is this news I'm hearing about? We are going to retreat from Ladakh lines, but we are going to announce that PLA
So
hit
this is
that.
just preemptive nonsense. So, these people, they keep coming up, these propagandists, they keep coming with preemptive stories. Okay.
There's nothing to
So,
that effect.
there's nothing that we know of to that effect. It could also be true.
Hmm.
Okay. The problem is I can literally preempt policy if I'm going to start prediction. Like what you see is that there is a understanding that Doklam became a reverse for us. What we won on the battlefield, not really a battlefield, a staring field or a standoff field, we gave up in Wuhan.
We gave up in Wuhan?
We gave up in Wuhan during the Wuhan summit between Modi and Xi Jinping. Because after that, we didn't have what we had won based on standing off against the Chinese at Doklam, we gave away in Wuhan because there was no stomach to stare them down anymore, because we sacrificed our position at the altar of good relations. We gave up tangibles in return for intangibles, which is the worst thing. Like Israeli-Palestinian land for peace, it never works. This time there is the belief that this is not going to happen, which is what makes this story highly unlikely. On the other hand, given that this government has learned nothing from its economic policies and keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again, not looking at second order effects, third order effects, even in Kashmir. I mean, it's not just economic policy, it's also security policy. झटका कर दिया, 370 निकाल दिया, उसके बाद जो deconflicting of the economy करना था, the decriminalization of society and the deconflicting of the economy, finding a new political class, all of that isn't happening. You're going back to the old people, the old power brokers, the same bloody terrorist leaders and all of that. So I mean, you're basically intersectional cross-governmental incompetence. You can't rule out incompetence. But from what I know, people knew that they got taken for a ride in Doklam at Wuhan. And there is a belief that it isn't going to happen. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Right. Well, have you been improving the relationships with Taiwan? I heard something.
No, not really. See, Taiwan is on a publicity blitz. The problem with Indian diplomacy is it is so compromised to China. Through commercial dealings and sometimes even honey traps, apparently. That's what the Taiwanese...
See, you tell me that and I'm like, that's wild.
But, our counterintelligence is terrible. If the only Chinese spy you can find in Delhi is a journalist, a non-accredited freelance journalist who has written for 6-7 different publications, it really shows you how trashy your counterintelligence is. Or maybe how compromised it is.
And that could not be because there are no Chinese spies in Delhi. That's not possible.
You really think there are no Chinese spies?
No, I mean, I'll be reasonable. I definitely think there would be.
Well, that's the point. Why haven't you been able to get them? Right. So maybe if they spent more time in actually doing proper counterintelligence instead of stupid sedition cases without any proof, where they throw people up in jail for 1 year just looking for proof and not finding any proof and then having to concoct proof.
Right. Is it? Please go ahead. I'll ask you the question later.
They would actually then do something. The problem is your standards on your diplomats posted in Beijing, returning from Beijing, going to Beijing are very lax. There is genuine concern, and this isn't just a Taiwanese concern. I've heard this from the Americans, I've heard this from the Japanese, I've heard this from the Swedes and the French, that our operational security is extremely lax. We're far too penetrated for their own good, for our own good. And one of the main reasons they don't give us technology is that they claim that they just don't trust our operational security measures, be it in terms of personnel or be it in terms of technology and processes. Okay. So, this is one, but I mean, we're reading too much into the compromise thing. There is also plain incompetence, Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what you can do.
Stupidity.
Incompetence to stupidity. Which is that we use the Dalai Lama, Tibet, and Taiwan as pinprick tools. Right? We use them and we throw them away when we don't need them. We don't look at them as assets, but this is our intelligence thing throughout. The way, Morarji Desai discarded all our assets in Pakistan. Then I.K. Gujral goes and does the same thing. Then Doval does the same thing all over again.
Disposed our assets in Pakistan.
Disposed or, disinvested. Morarji, we're no longer engaging with you. With I.K. Gujral again, we're no longer engaging with you. With Doval again, we're no longer engaging with you.
Why?
In Balochistan, the entire Balochistan insurgency. It's a technical flaw in the Indian mind. I don't know. It's this belief, and this is the most dangerous thing about all of this, is that individuals are still able to impose their will over institutional interests. Okay, it shows you what a primitive society we are, how primitive and crude and feudal and pre-industrial our systems, our institutional systems of governance are. And it's a very, very dangerous thing. On one hand, it's also a good thing when you want to implement change, but not a good thing when it's stupid policy, when you're trading intangibles for tangibles. Intelligence is a tangible, and insurgency is a tangible. Peace is an intangible. Okay, so Taiwan will be used. All you're doing is opening talks on a free trade, this thing. Taiwan has a whole gold mine of electronic intelligence and human intelligence on China. Are you doing any of that? No. Are you preventing your students from going to China and instead go to Taiwan to learn Chinese? No. So what are you actually doing? This is all, there's nothing actually in Indian foreign policy. Okay. Indian diplomats, the MEA is at best an event management agency. Okay. Think of a very glamorous event management agency with good access. That's about it. That is all they're realistically capable of. Rest of it is just tamasha, so there's nothing really happening with Taiwan per se. She may become Ingwen Tsai Ingwen. I'm so sorry, I forget the name. I keep getting confused. And I don't know why. It always happens with 3-syllable Taiwanese names, and always with the Taiwanese president. Is the most popular internet personality in India. But see, that's a trend. That's a fad. That isn't institutional engagement.
Right.
Which you need to start doing. But it's not happening. So it's sad, but it shows you how clumsy Indian foreign policy actually is.
Yeah, I wonder very often if China has the balls to openly undermine, and this is not even a contest of balls. It's just like the enemies on the face. They undermine our sovereignty when it comes to Arunachal, to Ladakh, to whatnot and what forth. How is it that we can house the Dalai Lama, claim that he was expelled from Tibet, but not called Tibet? Why is that not Indo-Tibetan border? Why do we at least linguistically not begin to do something like that?
Well, I mean, this you have to ask Nehru and Rajiv Gandhi and Vajpayee. Remember, this whole acceptance of Tibet being a part of China was put in motion by Rajiv Gandhi, but implemented by Vajpayee. And we didn't even get the commitment that Arunachal is a part of India in return. So why is it? I think this is something people really have to ponder. Why is it that every single time you give up your bargaining tools with China, 70 years running and continuing even today, right up to Doklam? If you come to the conclusion, there are only three conclusions to be had: incompetence, compromise, or a mix of the two. And if your political leadership still hasn't understood that, make a fool of me once, shame on you; make a fool of me twice, shame on me. So I'm not blaming the Chinese for this, I'm blaming us. Look, I never blame other people for our mistakes. It's very easy to blame Pakistan, China, but we need to introspect and look within ourselves. The fault, what is that Hindi song? दूसरों के जय से पहले खुद को जय करे. ऐसे कुछ है ना? हमको मन की
शक्ति देना. Right. We're fond of intangibles like man ki shakti.
We love that kind of nonsense.
Right, because that just removes everything that is immediate, proximate.
We don't really export anything tangible. Yoga, tandoori chicken. Well, tandoori chicken at least is a tangible.
Right.
Soft power. So, it's just crap.
ठीक है. How's your tweet about Pakistan was very interesting because you seem to suggest इतना कुछ बड़ा हो नहीं रहा. My Pakistani friends seem to be saying, "Oh, आवाम जाग रही है." There is all this news on the right media space कि भैया पाकिस्तान में तो सिविल वॉर ही चालू हो रही है. इमरान खान को आर्मी डिथ्रोन ही करके मानेगा and what not. Is that really happening or is that just like overblown? दिल्ली में जैसे प्रोटेस्ट हो जाती हैं लोग कैलकाटा में कर लेते हैं वैसा कुछ है?
This is like those those 5,000 good for nothings that collected at Jantar Mantar during cow lynching and said not in my name, and every newspaper blew it up as if it was the next big India against corruption rally or whatever. There was nothing happening. This fellow got kidnapped. This isn't even the first police officer to get kidnapped. About 5-6 of them have been kidnapped in the past. The police was angry. They did some gherawing and some patthar maring and all of that.
Imagine the police is patthar marenge yaar. तुम्हारा काम है पत्थर मारने वालों को manage करना.
It's nothing compared to what happened in India. You remember in Kashmir in 1989 when the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits happened, you had Kashmir civil service officers and police officers officially issuing threats to the Hindu community who never got sacked from their positions. They were retained in their positions.
So the civil servants and the policemen back in the late 80s, early 90s, when Pandits were being expelled from Kashmir, threatened them on top.
With the active collusion of the police, of the Jammu and Kashmir police. You had police, government, and other officials. Actually, some of them wrote a letter, remember? We don't accept Indian occupation, shit like that. No disciplinary action taken against them. Continued in government.
So, एक तो तुम भगा रहे हो, ऊपर से तुम गाली भी दे रहे हो और धमका भी रहे हो. अच्छा, this is way before.
And they Jagmohan for it. Okay. Whereas any serious historian, I mean, it's different if you're a historical prostitute. That's a different man, which is what most of our historians are. But any serious historian who sequences this can show you that Jagmohan had absolutely nothing to do with it. He came too late to stop anything. He departed too early to prevent anything. The state had broken down. The government had gone out of your hand. Okay. There's nothing you could have done. So this whole thing, so it happens in India also, right? This is what has happened in Pakistan. Police kuch ye kar raha hai, but the police always get treated like shit by the rangers who get treated by shit like the Pakistan army.
Right.
Okay. Kuch nahi ho raha tha. To be fair, I had a very encapsulated view from Clifton and the posh areas of Islamabad. Because all my friends are
in Islamabad,
part of the establishment, I guess.
Right.
They're part of that industrial, military, zamindari nexus that I keep criticizing all the time. Of course, they give me the best scotches, like 21-year-old scotches and things like that. So I can't.
I can imagine. Pakistan royalty is no joke, man. People are rich there. Like it's not like I have a friend with a bloody tiger in his house. तू मजाक कर रहा है? पता है पूरा कोलंबिया कम्युनिटी कहता है ये टाइगर वाला बच्चा कौन है जो क्लास में ज़ूम में पीछे टाइगर घूम रहा है. There's no joke.
You have stuff like that. You know, it's literally feudal.
It's feudal.
It's completely feudal. So they were telling me, देखो भाई हमारे इधर कुछ ये नाराबाजी हुआ है, पत्थर फेंकाई हुआ है. ज़्यादा कुछ तो नहीं है, 1-2 दिन में हो जाएगा, चला जाएगा. But where was the civil war? You know, even the videos they were putting, they put on some police guys doing something and they'd superimpose some movie ka thing of, you know, whistling bombs, World War II. Who uses whistling bombs in this day and age? If you're doing a sound morph, at least think intelligently. You know, this was part of that psychological strategy of the Stuka bomber, that the Stuka had its own sirens. When you put dive bomb, the siren was meant to introduce terror, and then the bomb itself had whistles built in. The stabilizer, the fin stabilizer, had a whistle built into it to increase the screeches, to increase the psychological terror. Uske baad se, because stealth is valuable, you don't want people to know there is a bomb falling till it's already blown you up. You'll be dead before you even know there is a bomb over your head.
Right.
It's not psychological anymore, it's all precision now.
Right.
You don't put that anymore. You're using World War II soundtrack सुपर इम्पोज्ड ऑन कुछ तो सोचो यार
मैं समझ रहा हूँ
डिसइंफॉर्मेशन करना है तो कम से कम
ढंग से तो
इंटेलिजेंट
करो हाँ इंटेलिजेंटली तो करो तो माने तो सही तो लेकिन पता है क्या अभिजीत आई ऑफ्टन कम अक्रॉस दिस आर्गुमेंट विद माय पाकिस्तानी फ्रेंड्स एंड देयर इज दिस लाइक आई नेवर न्यू कि the Pakistan side of Kashmir whatever they have is bloody peaceful anybody can go there like it's like no problem it's very accessible
not really you
अच्छा
can't actually go there no that's not true
हाँ
it is not true there are severe press restrictions out there far more restrictions than there are in Indian Kashmir actually
अच्छा but militarization नहीं है इतनी
hugely militarized
हाँ
society itself there is militarized
हम्म
right I mean Pakistani society is generally a very militarized society
हम्म
Pakistani, Israeli, Russian society are heavily militarized because of those two, because of the national character. One is because of two are because of conscription. In Pakistan, it's because the army is one of the few things that provides you with social in a feudal society. The army provides you with social climbing opportunities, which nothing else realistically can. Right? It's the one organization that actually affords you some limited social climbing.
right
So, no, Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan are extremely tightly controlled. My Pakistani friends don't mince their words about it. Maybe because your Pakistani friends aren't in the security field.
of course I
Mine
mean they're
are.
kids
They
and students
notice all these things and things like that.
हाँ
And all my non-Pakistani friends who lived in Pakistan or traveled there have also been telling me the same thing. They would much rather be in Indian Kashmir in terms of security restrictions and reporting restrictions, telephone restrictions, filming restrictions than they would be in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Right. So the whole surgical strike thing with the with whatever Abhinandan and Imran Khan was like बुला लो international media दिखा लो हमारे यहाँ तो कुछ नहीं हुआ है
एक महीने के बाद
हाँ अच्छा
एक
तो
महीने
मतलब
के
हुआ
बाद
था
अरे बिल्कुल हुआ था यार we have multiple sources confirming it so the same sources that confirmed to me that Karachi में कुछ नहीं हो रहा है were the same sources that confirmed to me Balakot में कुछ हुआ था why are they going to lie
सिर्फ चिड़िया मरी है कौवा मरा है that was all like this
that
हम
was
कितने peaceful हैं
their thing was see the one thing they confirmed was that who was the chief is it Syed Salahuddin or I forget now yeah they have
Khajwa you mean the chief of staff उसमें
of,
army में
the thing we targeted the terror camp that we
oh
targeted
अच्छा I don't remember his name हाँ
मसूद अजहर और सैयद सलाहुद्दीन यार इनके नाम इनका नामिंग डाइवर्सिटी इतना कम होता है ना एवरीबॉडी इज सैयद और मोहम्मद और समथिंग आई कांट रिमेंबर ऑल द नेम्स इट्स ऑल jumble like for white people every Indian is Raj and for every Indian for an Indian every Western guy is either a David or a Richard
or a John or
बस उसको Richard हाँ John Peter Richard David ये क्या नाम होते हैं तो ऐसे ही रख लो इनका ठीक है there was a news item that came out 2 days later that's either Syed Salahuddin or Masud
whatever the other guy's name
Masood
is
yeah let's just call it
Ahmed
Ahmed X
placeholder name
placeholder name that Ahmed X had been admitted his condition was very serious and there was speculation that he had been injured in that Indian airstrike
Achha.
Those sources confirmed to me now a multi-source confirmation there are my Pakistani sources who asked other people there were Pakistani sources around there who confirmed direct to me and completely different Pakistani sources that my friend Francesca Marino, the Italian reporter, has who confirmed to her that the strike was there. It killed somewhere between 30 to 80 people. The one thing that was never told to any of us was that Azhar X or Ahmed X has been killed. Had he been killed or injured, the first piece of information that would have been given to us is not that 30 to 80 people have died. It is that Azhar X has been, or Ahmed X has been badly injured, or just plain injured.
Right.
But that wasn't it. It was 30 to 80 people have died. So when you have multi-source confirmation like that, you have clear satellite image showing you 3 holes
right
on a tin roof. You have a clear time lapse between the period that the press is allowed to go out there.
Right. Right.
What happens?
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things. Balakot absolutely did happen. It did reduce their training strength. It set them back by about 2 to 3 years at least, because it killed the trainer program. So that was very important. It was also the first strike we carried out in Pakistan proper. It isn't disputed territory. It's Northwest Frontier Province, right? So that was important. That was very, very important. It was a very good thing to have done. It's one of the few things where, in spite of probably having thought of a jhatka mentality, even the second and third order policy effects were good.
Right. Okay. I think I'm pretty caught up for like a few weeks before I have you on again.